Hey book readers, it's monthly rewind time. As you can tell, I have a slightly different background. It's the Christmas season here at my household, so we are getting in the festive spirit with all kinds of decorations. We have some Dickens villages back there, Charles Dickens characters and settings that my wife has had since, I don't know how old she was, probably straight out of college, I guess. But now we're going to get into what I read in November. And this month I read a handful of books and I DNF'd a couple too. I cracked open everything from a surprisingly good nonfiction read to modern and retro sci-fi books and some fantasy novellas in there. So here's what I thought about all of it. First up, let's start with my favorite book of the month. This was a 5-star read for me, and this was Ice by Amy Brady. This book looks at the past 200 years or so of ice history, the history of ice. And it's, it goes from guys cutting huge chunks out of frozen lakes with their bare hands, doing that in winter, and then, shipping it south to us nowadays getting ice just straight from touching a little button on the refrigerator. Some of my favorite parts were about how ice revolutionized cocktails, especially in places like New Orleans and the Caribbean. There's some funny stories in the book about how one ice salesman had to refund people after he'd the very first time he'd ever really sold ice to them, put ice in their drinks, and then they came back, a few minutes later and were like, hey, this thing you sold me, it's gone. I want a refund. Give me my money back. Oh yeah, the ice salesman had to say, these things melt. They disappear. They keep your drinks cold, but the ice will disappear. And of course they were ticked about that, but eventually this ice salesman had to kind of go there. He had to create this market for ice. He had to give it away for free at first in order to get people to actually want it and realize how refreshing it was, especially in humid or hot climates. Then there were also some fun sections about ice skating, kind of a little bit of the history of ice skating and how it changed from people obviously on frozen ponds making shapes in the ice, and that was essentially ice skating. You'd make little designs and people thought they were cool, and then eventually this book gets into where there's a guy who's a little flamboyant at the time because he hires a whole orchestra to play for him as he dances on the ice, and this is kind of the genesis of figure skating. So it's really fascinating to see how that evolved over time. And lastly, I really like the quick little histories they had of ice cream and iced tea, something that's near and dear, both of these things that are near and dear to my heart and my sweet tooth. But the author also explores the importance of ice in modern practice through sports, hockey, medicine, keeping organs cold as they're transferred so that people can have life-saving gift of somebody who's passed away, their organs. Well, we need ice to do that. And then also there's kind of a little section about sustainable energy and how ice plays into that. Overall, a super interesting book about a seemingly boring topic that I knew nothing about, but man, this is a good one if you're into nonfiction. Next up, I read Beautyland by Marie-Helene Bertino. In this book, Adina is the main character, and she's born in the late 1970s and believes she's an alien. As she grows up, she kind of keeps these logs about the crazy earthlings that are around her. She makes little notes about all these teeny tiny things that are happening in her life. And then she sends these reports to her superiors, who she thinks are kind of these aliens who are far away out of the solar system. She's kind of contacting them through some kind of telepathy. Obviously, with this disconnect of what she is and where she is, she feels out of place. She feels different. She feels lonely. And she doesn't feel like Earth is her home exactly. And so she yearns to be with others who are like her. Anyway, eventually she's encouraged to share these logs that she's been keeping throughout her life with humans, with other people. And they're a huge hit. She's suddenly kind of revered as this deep, thoughtful artist. I gave this book 4 stars. I cranked through the first part of the book, but the back half kind of slows down a little bit, so I didn't get through the last several chapters as quickly. In my mind, it's still up in the air as to whether Adina is an alien by the end of the book. You're not really sure. It could go either way, and I think that's kind of the part that makes it a good book. You have to think about it for yourself, and it'll keep you kind of thinking about it, days, weeks, months after you've read it, because I don't know, was she, wasn't she? never to be answered, really. This month I also read the book Last Day on Mars by Kevin Emerson. So this one is set in the year 2213, I think, and the sun is slowly going supernova for some strange reason. So humans have already left Earth for Mars. They've set up their colony on Mars, but it's kind of just this temporary stop because the supernova is slowly expanding, so eventually it's going to reach Mars. And that's what's happening in this book. The supernova is just about to reach Mars. It's the last day on Earth before people have to desert that red planet for a completely new star system. And during this final day, two teens make some discoveries that rewrite the history of and our understanding of what's happening with the supernova, what's happening kind of in a cosmic scale of things, and where we fit into that whole picture. This was a middle grade sci-fi book, however, it had a lot of depth to it, actually. The story starts off pretty slow, but picks up steam as it goes along and adds layers to the beings involved in the plot, as well as there's a powerful device or two that's thrown in, and then the characters are using kind of practical strategies that make sense. There's nothing too crazy or out there. They're using these strategies to escape from the bad guys. All of this combined, it's a pretty good, YA middle grade read. And that's why I gave it 4 stars. It left a lot of questions unanswered, but in a good way. I was tempted, or I am kind of tempted, to read the second book in the series, this whole series. Not sure if I'll do it. But I could see myself picking it up. It was that good. This month I also read What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. This is a retelling of Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher, and I wasn't familiar with EAP's tale, that one, so I was kind of a blank slate going into this. Not sure if that helped or hindered my enjoyment of it, but anyway. Long story short, it's a horror mystery involving mushrooms, zombie-like rabbits, sleepwalking, and illnesses. Now, I'm no huge fan of mysteries, but I'm a big fan of T. Kingfisher, so I wanted to give this one a shot. And unfortunately, the mystery element overpowers the T. Kingfisher element. I still gave it 4 stars, though, because the ending was really well done, really satisfying, but I waded through a bunch of time just kind of not caring a bunch of the story. I had to slog through just in order to get the ending, which, again, worth it. Definitely not my favorite T. Kingfisher novel. You could do worse. Speaking of which, I also read Illuminations by T. Kingfisher this month. And if you paid any attention to my channel, I've been working my way bit by bit through the T. Kingfisher catalog, and this one is one that I wish I'd skipped. It's a super basic YA fantasy about families of painters whose works of art have magical powers, and certain paintings will, ward things off or bring luck or do all kinds of different things specific to whatever is in the painting. It tells that painting, it makes that magic happen to a specific thing. The main character is Rosa, and she discovers this bad magical creature that is kind of wreaking havoc in her home and is kind of threatening to expand its activities into her neighborhood, her community, and she's got to stop it. And of course, she's a dumb kid, so she tries to hide this bad magical being from her family, from her friends. She doesn't get them in the loop as soon as possible, which of course you're just like shaking your head the whole time, like, come on, just what are you thinking, kid? Obviously, they do eventually get involved, and that's basically it. It's super, super straightforward. And that's why I only gave it 3 stars, putting it near the bottom of my T. Kingfisher rankings. Bottom line is that read any other book other than this one if you're going to read T. Kingfisher, because it's really not her best. Next up, I read Fina by Nino Cipri. This was a quirky multiverse story where a customer at a big box store gets sucked into a parallel universe, and 2 of the store's workers, who happen to be ex-lovers, have to go through this wormhole in order to retrieve the customer. I gave it 3 stars. It sounded like a playful, promising premise, lots of alliteration there, but it just wasn't that much fun, really. It was simple, it lacked depth, and there was hardly any character development. And honestly, I can only take so much of characters who are exes just kind of whining and bickering at each other, while also realizing that this catastrophe that they're both taking part of, this, this quest that they're going on, is clearly going to bring them closer together. That element was telegraphed from a million miles away, and so I didn't really enjoy it all that much. Another book I read this month was The Ship That Sailed the Time Stream by G.C. Edmondson. And I picked up this sci-fi retro book from Half Price Books a few months ago, and it was basically what I expected, a time travel story set in 1965 with simple characters, confusing plot involving a U.S. Navy ship jumping to different eras in the past, and then it also has way too many scantily clad ladies that are just being lusted after by members of the crew, and that's why I gave it 3 stars. Nothing much to write home about here. Wouldn't really recommend it unless you're kind of a vintage retro sci-fi junkie. And like I mentioned at the beginning, there were also 2 books that I DNF'd this month, which is something that I've kind of been doing more and more as I get just more comfortable with doing it, I guess. The first one was Roadside Picnic. This is a beloved sci-fi book for a lot of people, and I got 50% through the book. I got halfway through, and I just realized that I wasn't feeling it. To me, it had some Annihilation vibes. If you've read the book Annihilation, it's kind of a you love it or hate it type of book. It's almost the way I felt about this one. I didn't care enough about the mystery, and as I've talked before about, mysteries, if they're done a certain way, I'm not into them. So that probably was part of the reason why I DNF'd this one. And then also another book I DNF'd at about a third of the way through was The Bullet Swallower. And this was kind of a new modern Western. It's probably been released in the last handful of years, I think. And I just really couldn't get into the setting. I thought I would love it because it takes place kind of on the border between Mexico and Texas. I'm from Texas. I love reading Texas novels set in my home state. But yeah, just kind of, there was some violence, gunfights, kind of classic Western things happening, but for whatever reason, I could not, maybe it was there's alternating chapters between past and present, and I think maybe somehow that kind of didn't grab me as much as I was hoping it would. So anyway, I gave up after about a third of this one. So be sure to let me know in the comments if you've read any of these before, what you thought about them, you liked them, you didn't like them, you DNF'd them, and don't forget to like and subscribe as well. Happy reading!